The House by the Dunes. Part 1. The road narrowed after the bridge. The salt air came through the window, and I could taste the metal in it. The ocean was only a line at first, then it opened wide, gray and restless. The wind was rising from the south. It carried the smell of rain, the kind that starts slow and stays for days. The house sat where it always had, half buried by the dunes. The roof leaned a little more now. The paint had gone dull, and the porch railing sagged toward the sea. 20 years of wind will do that. I parked beside the fence that used to be white and listened to the gulls. They were louder than I remembered. Everything was. Her postcard was still in my pocket. The light here is different now. That was all she'd written. No greeting, no name. Just that. I'd turned the card over a dozen times on the drive, looking for something else she might have meant. Maybe there was nothing. Maybe that was the point. I stood there for a while, staring at the dunes. The wind had carved new shapes into them, as if the land kept trying to forget the past. My shoes filled with sand before I reached the porch steps. The boards groaned under my weight. I knocked once, then again. The sound vanished into the house like it had been waiting for me. The door opened before I finished the second knock. She was there. "Jack," she said. "Marian." She didn't move to hug me, and I didn't move either. The space between us was polite, the kind you give to strangers who might have been something else once. She looked older, but not smaller. Her hair was still dark, streaked now with silver. The lines at her mouth were deeper, like the sea had left them there. "You found it," she said. "It hasn't moved. Neither have we." She smiled then, a small thing that never reached her eyes. She stepped back, and I followed her inside. The smell hit me first. Coffee, soap, salt. It was clean, almost bare. The furniture was simple. 2 chairs, a table, a lamp I didn't remember. Everything else was gone. She poured coffee into a chipped mug and set it on the table. The cup steamed between us, but she didn't sit. "You came fast," she said. "I was nearby." "That's a lie." "It is." She gave a small nod, as if that was fair enough. Outside, thunder murmured somewhere off the coast. The windows rattled. "You keep the place nice," I said. "I keep it standing." "That's different." She moved to close a window where the curtain flapped in the wind. I watched her hands. She still wore no ring. I wondered if she ever had again. "I thought about selling," she said, "but I wanted one more season." "Why?" She looked at me then, eyes clear and sharp, to see if it still meant anything. I sat down. The chair creaked the way it used to. "And does it?" "I haven't decided." The storm was crawling closer. The air inside the house had that heavy stillness that comes before rain. I lifted the mug, but didn't drink. It tasted like the past, and I wasn't ready for it. We talked about safe things. Her teaching job at the community college. My work in town. The price of fuel, the noise tourists made. We were careful. Words like stones across a river. At one point she laughed. It startled both of us. "What?" I asked. "You still do that," she said. "You wait for me to fill the silence." "I thought you liked doing that." "I used to. Now it feels like work." I smiled a little. "I came all this way. Least you could do is talk." She shook her head, but the corner of her mouth softened. "You shouldn't have come, Jack." "I know. But you did anyway." "Yes." Rain hit the roof then, soft at first, then harder. She went to the door to pull it shut, and the house darkened. Lightning flashed beyond the dunes. The sound that followed rolled long and low. "Well," she said, "looks like you'll be staying a while." I didn't plan on it. Neither did the storm. She found 2 candles and set them on the table. The small flames moved like nervous hands. The power flickered once, twice, and then went out. The only light came from those 2 candles and the sea's gray glow through the window. I leaned back, listening to the rain drum the roof. It was steady, insistent. "It's strange being here," I said. "How so?" "Everything's familiar, but smaller. Maybe you got bigger. Older, maybe." She nodded. "It's not the same house you remember." I noticed. "You changed, too." "Not enough, apparently." She looked at me for a long moment. "You left because you had to." "I left because I wanted to see if I could." "And could you?" "Not really." She walked to the window, watching the rain slide down the glass. "Freedom never lasts as long as people think. Neither does forgiveness." That made her turn. The candlelight caught her face, half in shadow. "You came for that?" she asked. "I don't know what I came for." She came closer then, arms folded, the smell of her hair faintly sweet beneath the salt. "Then maybe you should figure it out before the tide changes." Her voice wasn't angry. It was something quieter and worse. I stood. You always liked the storms. They made sense, she said. They start, they break, they pass. Not all of them. A flash lit the room white, and for a moment I could see her clearly. The lines around her eyes, the faint tremor in her hands. She'd been holding herself together for too long. The thunder hit right after, hard enough to make the lamp rattle. The rain came heavier. It hammered the windows and poured through the gutters. She shut the curtains and came to sit across from me. We could barely hear each other over the sound of it. You remember the night the roof leaked? She said. How could I forget? You made me climb up in the middle of it. You wouldn't do it sober. I still almost broke my neck. But you fixed it. I did. She smiled a little. You were always better at fixing things than keeping them. I looked at her and felt that old ache again, the one that had never really gone away. She must have seen it because she turned back toward the window. The wind howled, bending the dunes. The smell of wet sand filled the room. Somewhere far off, the sea was throwing itself against the rocks. It sounded angry or lonely. It was hard to tell the difference. She poured wine into 2 glasses. The candlelight made the red look dark, almost black. She handed one to me. You still drink. Less than I used to. Before or after you started missing me? I took a slow sip. During. That made her laugh again, but this time it came out rough, like she hadn't done it in a while. You haven't changed, Jack. I think I have. Then prove it. How? Stay until morning. I don't know if that's a good idea. It isn't. She looked straight at me when she said it. The wind hit the house again, hard enough to shake the door. The candles flickered. She stood, moved to the fireplace, and set a match to the kindling. The flame caught slow, then quick, throwing light across the room. She sat on the floor in front of it and held out her hands to the warmth. I stayed where I was, watching her. The fire made her look younger, or maybe I just wanted it to. She didn't look at me, but she knew I was there. You can sit, she said. The storm isn't going anywhere. I moved to the hearth and sat beside her. The heat reached my face, the kind that dries the air and makes you aware of your breathing. The wind roared in the chimney, and the house groaned with it. For a long time, we didn't speak. The fire popped, and she leaned back against the old brick wall. Her shoulder brushed mine. It was nothing, but it felt like something. I didn't think you'd answer, I said. I almost didn't send it. The postcard. She nodded. It sat on my desk for weeks. I kept meaning to throw it away. Why didn't you? I wanted to see if you still would. Would what? Come running. I laughed once low. You knew I would. Yes, she said. I did. Outside, the storm climbed higher. The sound of it was constant now, like the sea trying to get in. The lights from the town were gone, hidden behind the rain. The firelight filled the room in their place. I looked at her and thought about what it would take to say I was sorry, not for leaving, but for the way I'd done it. I almost said it. Instead, I finished the wine. She turned her head slightly. You're thinking too loud. Maybe. Don't. It ruins the quiet. She was right. The quiet was the only thing holding us together. The fire cracked again, sending up a small shower of sparks. She watched them climb and disappear. The air smelled of rain and smoke and everything that used to be us. The storm didn't break until after midnight. The sound of it softened, then stopped altogether, like someone had turned the sea off. The air was thick and still. The fire had burned low, only a bed of red coals left, pulsing quietly in the dark. She had fallen asleep sitting up, her head tipped slightly toward the light. Her breathing was slow and steady. The shadows moved across her face like waves. I didn't wake her. There was something fragile about the way she slept, like it had taken her years to let herself rest. I stood and went to the window. The rain had washed everything clean. The dunes glowed pale in the moonlight, reshaped again by the wind. The tide had come in high, leaving a silver line at the edge of the sand. Beyond that, the sea was black and still. Behind me, she stirred. Is it over? For now. She rubbed her eyes, blinking at the dim room. I must have drifted off. You needed it. I didn't mean to. It's all right. She looked around, as if surprised by how quiet the house had become. I used to hate that silence, she said. After the storms. Why? It reminded me what was left. I didn't answer. The coals gave off just enough light to catch her eyes. She looked at me then, really looked, and the space between us changed. She stood, stretching a little, the hem of her shirt catching the glow from the fire. Do you still walk down to the shore? She asked. Sometimes. Let's go. It's after midnight. I know. She was already pulling on her coat. I followed her outside. The air was cold and salt-heavy. The sand was damp beneath our shoes. The moon was bright enough to see our breath. We walked without talking, the sound of our steps muffled by the dunes. The grass hissed faintly in the wind. The world felt emptied out, just the two of us and the long stretch of beach. At the edge of the water, she stopped. The tide had begun to slip back, leaving thin rivulets that caught the light. The waves came in soft and low, brushing against our feet. I used to come here after you left, she said. Stand right here. I tell myself I wasn't waiting for anything. And were you? She smiled faintly. Of course I was. The breeze lifted her hair. I reached up, almost without thinking, to push it back. She didn't move away. For a moment, we stood there, the space between us filled with the sound of the sea. I kept your letters, she said. I didn't write many. Enough. She turned toward me then, eyes searching. You think we could ever go back? No, I said. But we could start again. She gave a small laugh. At our age. At any age. She looked away, toward the horizon. The first faint streak of dawn was there, a pale line between sea and sky. You always were the dreamer, she said. You always were the reason. That made her close her eyes. When she opened them again, they were wet. You shouldn't say things like that. Why not? Because I'll believe you. The tide whispered in and out. I reached for her hand. She let me. Her fingers were cold, but she didn't pull away. We stood there a long time, saying nothing, letting the wind carry whatever it wanted. When the sun finally broke, it came slow, just a pale glow behind the clouds, soft and unreal. She watched it like she was memorizing it. I used to think love was supposed to be loud, she said. Big gestures, long speeches. And now I think it's what stays after everything else is gone. We turned back toward the house. The sand clung to our shoes. The air had that clean smell that comes after rain. The roof of the old place caught the new light, and for a moment it looked almost whole again. Inside, the fire was down to ash. The room was cold, but neither of us seemed to mind. She poured more coffee and handed me a cup. We stood by the window, watching the tide pull away. I could fix the railing, I said. And the roof. You don't have to. I want to. She looked at me for a long time. You'll just leave again. Maybe, I said. Maybe not. That's not an answer. It's the only one I have. She smiled a little. You always did talk like a man who wanted to be forgiven. And you always listened like a woman who already had. Her eyes softened. You still think words can save things? No, I said. But they can start something. She set her cup down, walked past me, and opened the door. The wind came in, cool and new. She stood there, one hand on the frame. Stay until the light changes, she said. I nodded. Outside, the gulls were back, circling over the wet sand. The sea kept its slow rhythm, endless and patient. I watched her step out onto the porch, barefoot now, her hair catching the sun. For the first time in years, she didn't look like someone waiting. She looked like someone beginning again. And for once, I didn't try to stop her. The wind carried the scent of the sea through the open door, and the sound of it filled the house. The tide moved closer, then away, and the day began the way all days do, quietly, like forgiveness arriving late, but still finding its way home. The wind changed in the weeks that followed. It came warmer, softer from the south, carrying the smell of grass and pine instead of salt and iron. The sea calmed. The house, too, seemed to settle into itself. I stayed, not because we decided anything, but because neither of us said otherwise. Most days I worked on the porch. The railing had rotted through where the salt air had eaten at it. The boards creaked like old bones. I tore them out one by one, replaced what I could, planed what I couldn't. The rhythm of it filled the days. Measure, cut, sand, nail. The sound of the hammer drifted out to where she painted by the dunes. She didn't paint the sea anymore. She painted the things that held still, a teacup, the curve of a shell, the light on the steps at dusk. Her strokes were patient, almost shy. When she worked, her mouth went still, her whole face calm in a way I hadn't seen before. Sometimes she'd come to the porch around noon, bring coffee or cold tea, sit with me a while. We didn't talk much. Words didn't seem necessary. The sound of the waves filled the space between us. One afternoon, she asked, "You planning to stay through summer?" I set down the hammer. Hadn't thought that far. You always say that. I never was much for planning. She smiled, looking out toward the sea. That's what I used to like about you. What changed? I grew up. She said it simply, not as a wound, but as a fact. The wind moved her hair across her cheek. I wanted to reach out and move it back, but I didn't. Later that day, we walked down to the beach. The tide was low, the sand wide and hard as a road. A small line of gulls followed us, waiting for something they didn't need. She bent down to pick up a piece of driftwood, smooth, curved like a question mark. I thought I'd forgotten this place, she said. But the sound came back first. It's the same as it was. It never really leaves. No, she said, just changes shape. We walked on until the water brushed our shoes. The sun was low, a pale orange in the west. I could see the reflection of the house in her eyes, the slant of the roof, the cracked window, the patch of blue where I'd already painted new boards. Why did you come back, Jack? She asked quietly. Because you wrote. That's not an answer. It's the only one I've got. She nodded, like she expected that. You always were a hard man to read. I thought I was simple. No, just afraid of being known. I didn't answer. There wasn't much to say. The tide came in again, pulling the sand around our feet. She stepped closer, just enough that our shoulders touched. I used to think about you when it rained, she said. Not the you I knew, but the one I hoped you'd become. Did I? She smiled faintly. Maybe. You listen now. That night the wind rose again, soft and full of the sea. The old boards on the roof thudded gently, like a heartbeat. I couldn't sleep, so I went outside. The stars were faint, thin against the mist. The house behind me glowed in places where the lantern light leaked through the cracks. She came out a few minutes later, wrapped in a blanket. You still walk in the middle of the night, she said. Some things don't change. Maybe that's all right. We stood side by side, listening to the waves. The air was cool, but not cold. The world felt smaller, closer. Do you ever think about the years between? She asked. Not much. I do. Sometimes it feels like they didn't happen. Like we just blinked. Maybe we did. She laughed softly. I wish I'd known then what I know now. What's that? That nothing good comes from waiting. She looked at me then, her eyes steady and clear. The blanket slipped slightly from her shoulders, and I could see the small, steady movement of her breath. She didn't look like someone carrying regret anymore. She looked like someone standing exactly where she needed to be. I'll finish the roof tomorrow, I said. All right. You could paint the trim. That pale color you used on the windows. You want my help now? Always did. She smiled again, small and real. We're too old to start pretending. Maybe we're just old enough to stop. The moon rose slow and full over the water. It caught the line of her jaw, the curve of her smile. And for a moment, I thought about what it meant to come back to a life instead of a place. We went inside when the wind grew colder. The fire was out, but the air held its warmth. She hung her blanket over the chair and poured us both a little whiskey from the bottle she kept by the window. To the house, she said, raising her glass. To what's left of it, I said. She touched her glass to mine. The sound was small and bright. We drank in silence. The light flickered from the lantern, throwing our shadows against the wall. Hers reached farther than mine, long and soft, like it had been waiting there for years. When I turned toward her, she was watching me, not searching, not asking, just seeing. It felt like standing still after walking a long way. Outside, the tide was climbing again, pulling closer to the edge of the dunes. The sound filled the space between words. It was then I realized the house wasn't the only thing being rebuilt. Weeks passed, and the house grew lighter. The walls were clean where she had painted, the porch solid beneath my hands. I measured, cut, and nailed. She worked beside me, brushing white along the trim, painting in slow, deliberate strokes. We spoke when we had to. Mostly, the sound of our movements filled the rooms. The occasional laugh, soft, careful, echoed between the walls. I learned her rhythm, the way she paused before a word, the way her brush would falter slightly if I leaned too close. She learned mine, though neither of us admitted it. One morning, I found her sitting on the steps, staring at the horizon. The sea was calm, the tide retreating. A gull circled overhead. I set down the hammer and walked over. You've gotten faster, she said. Or lazier. Maybe both. I crouched beside her, looking at the line where the waves met sand. Did you ever think we'd do this again? No, she said. And yes. I don't know why, exactly, but I thought maybe we could. I nodded. That was enough for now. Later that day, a letter came in the mail. Not the small, curt type she usually received, but a thick envelope, heavy in her hands. She opened it slowly, her eyes scanning the page, then looked at me. "It's from your old department," she said. "Old department? The one in Boston. They're asking if you'll give a lecture. Next month." I considered the offer and the distance. "I don't know if I want to go back." "You don't have to," she said. "But it seems like something you should think about." I nodded again, thinking about the house, the sea, and the weeks that had passed. "I don't know if I should." "You could always stay," she said, almost casually. But I heard the weight in the almost. That evening, we worked on the porch together. I hammered boards into place while she painted the trim. The sound of the hammer and brush filled the house like a quiet conversation. Every so often, she'd pause, look at the work, and shake her head lightly. "You missed a spot," she'd say. I'd pretend to frown, then laugh. The wind had risen again, moving through the dunes, bending the grass. It was the same sound as before, but gentler now, as if the house and the sea were forgiving us for our absence. After the work was done, we sat on the porch steps, drinking tea. The sun was low, painting the horizon in shades of gray and gold. She didn't speak at first. Then she said quietly, "You know, the house isn't the only thing you've fixed. Has anything changed?" I asked. Her eyes met mine, steady and calm. "Maybe. Slowly. Enough that I can stand beside you without thinking about what went wrong before." I didn't reply. The wind carried the faint smell of rain from the morning storm, the sea's brine, and the pine from the dunes. The light shifted, and for a moment, it looked as if the house had always been this way, solid, enduring, alive. She leaned back slightly, brushing sand from her coat. "Do you remember when we first came here?" "I do," I said. "The nights were colder than they are now. We thought we could control the sea, the weather, even each other. We were wrong," I said. "Still, we learned something," she said. "Even if it took 20 years to get it right." I nodded, thinking of the months behind us, the small improvements, the quiet evenings, and the sound of waves that had always been there. A gull cried over the dunes. The tide was moving back in, soft and slow. She stood, stretching her arms. "Come on," she said. "There's still work to be done. And tomorrow, we'll finish the roof." I watched her for a moment. Then I followed. The house felt alive now, breathing with the wind and the sea, with us in it. And somewhere between the hammering of boards, the painting of trim, and the quiet conversation of two people learning to live together again, I realized that some things, if tended carefully, could be repaired. The letter sat unopened on the counter, a quiet reminder of the outside world. We didn't speak of it again that night. The wind moved through the open windows, carrying a faint promise. The past might stay behind the dunes, but the present was ours, waiting to be claimed. And in that silence, I understood that the house wasn't the only thing being built. The roof was finished by mid-morning. The last board fit into place with a satisfying snap. I stepped back, wiping sweat from my forehead. The house looked solid again, stronger than it had in years. The paint gleamed faintly in the pale light, and the wind bent the dunes in the way it had always done, gentle and inevitable. She came up the steps carrying 2 mugs of tea. The steam curled lazily in the morning air. "I think we did it," she said. "It looks like it." We stood side by side, looking at the house, listening to the sea. A gull cried far off, and the tide shifted again. She handed me a mug. I accepted it without a word. "Do you think anyone will notice?" she asked. "Maybe," I said. "Maybe not. Doesn't matter." She took a sip, eyes on the horizon. "It matters to us." "Yeah," I said. "It does." We walked down to the shore again, boots leaving shallow prints in the wet sand. The wind was light, carrying the scent of rain from the night before. The tide whispered at our feet. "I didn't think we'd finish it," she said. "We didn't have a choice," I said. "Sometimes, that's the only way things get done," she said. We walked in silence for a while. The sand was smooth, and the world felt stripped down to its essentials: sky, sea, house, and the sound of our steps. "I heard from Boston," I said finally. She looked at me, curious but not surprised. "They want me to give a lecture," I said. "Next month. And I don't know. You could go," she said, "if that's what you want." "I could stay," I said. She smiled faintly. "You might." We walked back slowly. The house waited, solid and unchanged by the decision we hadn't yet made. The wind rattled the old boards in the eaves. The dunes held the memory of storms past, and storms yet to come. Inside, I sat at the table. The letter from Boston lay unopened. She poured tea for both of us, and we drank quietly. The sun shifted across the room, falling on the freshly painted trim, the repaired railing, the steady rhythm of a house brought back to life. "You did good work here," she said. "We did," I corrected her. Her smile was small, real, and brief. She looked at me with an ease I hadn't seen before. "I think I'm glad you came back," she said. "So am I," said. The tide whispered outside, low and soft. The gulls had gone. The house held its breath. I realized then that the choice would come, eventually. But for the moment, it didn't matter. We had the house, the sea, and the quiet knowledge that some things could be repaired if you were willing to try. She moved to the window, brushing a stray strand of hair from her face. "The postcard was right," she said softly. "The light here is different now." I watched her silhouette against the rising sun. "It's not the light," I said. "It's us." She turned to me, eyes steady. Maybe it always was." The wind rose again, soft and insistent. We didn't speak, only listened. Outside, the sea rolled, endless and patient. Inside, the house stood whole. And in the quiet, I understood that we had found something we had lost long ago. Not just the house, but ourselves, in the time we were willing to give. The letter remained on the counter, unopened, a reminder of the world beyond the dunes. But for the first time in a long while, it didn't matter. The past was behind us, the house was restored, and we were here. And that was enough. Chapter 2. The Letter. The morning was pale. The wind had dropped to a whisper, and the tide receded slowly, leaving long, wet sandbars behind. I drank my coffee on the porch, watching the waves. The house was quiet, repaired but still holding the memory of storms in its boards and shingles. Marian was inside, humming softly as she moved about the kitchen. The sound carried lightly to the porch, through the open door. I realized then how much the quiet had become part of the rhythm of this place, how it was no longer empty. I had almost finished sanding the last piece of the railing. My hands were raw and calloused. I set the tools aside and walked inside. She looked up at me, smiled faintly, and went back to her task. "You know," she said, "I didn't think we'd last a whole week without arguing." "I didn't think so either," I said. We both laughed, small and careful. The kind of laugh that comes from remembering old patterns without wanting to repeat them. "I found something this morning," she said, setting a folded envelope on the counter. "In the mailbox. No stamp, just my name." I leaned closer. The paper was heavy, cream-colored. Her handwriting was tight and deliberate. "What is it?" I asked. She didn't answer immediately. She opened it slowly, then paused. I could see the line of her mouth tighten ever so slightly. "Who is it from?" I asked. "Does it matter?" I shrugged. "Only if it changes anything." She unfolded the letter fully and read silently for a long moment. I waited, watching her fingers smooth the paper. Outside, the gulls circled lazily above the dunes. The tide was low and still, a silver stretch beneath the pale sky. Finally, she looked up. "It's from someone I thought I'd never hear from again. You want to tell me?" "I'm not sure." I nodded. "Then don't." "Not yet." She folded the letter again and placed it gently on the counter. The curl of the paper seemed to hold some of her hesitation, the weight of something unsaid. We left the kitchen together, moving toward the porch. The wind came in light from the south, brushing our hair against our faces. We didn't speak. Silence had become a kind of language between us. "Do you think people change?" I asked suddenly. She looked at me, curious. "Some do, some don't." "Why?" "Because this letter, it makes me wonder how much the past matters." She shrugged. "It matters until you decide it doesn't." We sat in our chairs, looking out at the dunes. I could see her eyes, steady and calm. There was a distance in them, but not a cold one. Just measured, guarded. The kind of look that said she had survived things I would never understand fully. "Do you ever regret coming back?" she asked. "No," I said. "Not yet." She tilted her head, as if considering whether that was true. "Not yet," she repeated. "Careful words, Jack. They're the only ones I have left." She smiled faintly. The wind picked up again, brushing the tops of the dunes. The tide moved inward, a slow and patient rhythm that felt older than either of us. "Should I open it?" she asked, her voice soft. "You could," I said. "Or you could wait until you know why it matters." She nodded. "I think I'll wait." We drank our coffee in silence. letting the tide's rhythm fill the space between us. It was the first quiet before a storm that wasn't just in the sky, a storm of old memories, of choices left behind, of words unsaid. The light shifted, pale and gray, through the windows. I could see the faint lines in her face, the curve of her mouth, the subtle tension in her shoulders. Something had arrived in that envelope that might change everything or nothing. The weight of it pressed lightly in the air between us. "You know," she said finally, "the sea doesn't forgive. It only remembers." "I think we do that for ourselves," I said. She looked at me, thoughtful. "Maybe. But some letters, they remind us anyway." I didn't answer. I could hear the faint scratching of waves against sand, the distant call of a gull, the house settling under its own weight. And I knew, with that quiet certainty that comes after storms, that nothing here would ever be quite the same again. The envelope lay on the counter. She hadn't opened it. Neither of us touched it. Outside, the wind picked up, bending the dunes, carrying the smell of rain and sea. The quiet stretched between us, full of possibility, tension, and unspoken choices. And I understood, finally, that this letter would decide something, though I didn't yet know what. The morning was still, almost too still. The tide had gone out far, leaving slick sand stretching beneath a pale sky. I was on the porch, sanding the last board of the new railing, when I heard a car on the gravel drive. It was slow, deliberate, as if the driver knew the house would recognize the sound. Marian appeared at the kitchen door, drying her hands on a towel. She frowned slightly, a crease forming between her brows. "You expecting anyone?" "No," I said. The car stopped at the edge of the driveway. A man stepped out, tall, lean, with a worn coat and a wide-brimmed hat. He looked older than I thought someone like him could, the kind of man who carries the past in the set of his shoulders. Marian's lips pressed together. "I think that's him." "Who?" I asked, lowering the sander. "The one who sent the letter." I stiffened, feeling the sudden weight of weeks of quiet lift like mist in the morning sun. I hadn't expected this, not so soon, not so real. The man approached slowly, each step measured. His eyes were sharp, dark, and curious, scanning the house, the porch, then settling on us. "I'm sorry to trouble you," he said, tipping his hat. "Marian." She nodded, stepping forward. "Yes, that's me." "I'm Thomas," he said. "I sent the letter. I didn't know it would reach you so quickly." I didn't speak. I just watched him, trying to read the line of his jaw, the set of his eyes. Something in his posture suggested he had rehearsed this arrival. Something in his hands suggested he hadn't. Marian glanced at me, then back at him. "It's all right. Come in." He hesitated, then followed us into the house. The air was heavy with the scent of the sea, of paint, of varnish. He looked around, taking it all in without comment. "I didn't expect," he said, trailing off. "Expect what?" I asked. "That you'd be here," he said. "All of you." "You mean me?" I said. He nodded. "Yes, both of you." I didn't know that she'd still. "Still what?" I asked. "Live like this," he said finally. "By the sea. Away from everything else." I didn't answer. I understood. We all had things we ran from. Some of us ran farther than others. Marian poured him a cup of coffee. He took it without looking up. The steam curled into his face, and for a moment he seemed less a man and more a shadow, trying to settle into the shape of the room. "I didn't come to cause trouble," he said. "I only wanted to talk." "Clarify." "Clarify what?" I asked. He hesitated, glancing at Marian. "About the past. About decisions made, letters sent, things left unsaid." The quiet stretched. Outside, the wind moved across the dunes, bending the grass in slow, rhythmic waves. The gulls were distant, quiet. The sea whispered at the edge of the sand. Marian set her cup down, brushing her hands together. "Thomas," she said, "you've said enough for now. Sit. We'll talk, but slowly. This is our home, and we move at our pace." He nodded. "I understand." I watched him sit across from us. The light from the window caught the lines in his face, the deep set of his eyes. He was tense, guarded. A man who had carried a letter too long. "You sent a letter," I said finally. "Why?" He looked at me, unflinching. "Because I had to. I couldn't leave things the way they were. I thought it might help. Or at least not make it worse." "Make what worse?" Marian asked. He shrugged slightly. "Everything. The misunderstandings. The distance. The silence. You can't measure the weight of years until someone tries to put it into words. I understood that, though I didn't move. Words could start things, but they couldn't finish them. Marian poured another cup of coffee, then sat down beside me. She didn't take his hand, didn't smile, didn't give any indication of how she felt. But the quiet between us felt different, sharper. I think we need to know, he said. Not for me, not really. For you. For both of you. And if it changes nothing? I asked. Then at least you've spoken, he said. And silence has finally moved on. Marian looked at me, her eyes steady. We'll see, she said. Outside, the wind rose again, bending the dunes, carrying the faint tang of rain from the horizon. The gulls called somewhere far off. The house stood quiet, solid, waiting. I knew, even before he spoke again, that the calm we had built was fragile. The visitor had arrived, not with anger, but with memory. And memory, like the tide, does not wait for anyone. We drank our coffee in silence, listening to the sea, the wind, and the faint sounds of a house holding its breath. Outside, the light shifted, and for a moment it looked as if the dunes themselves leaned toward the sound of words long withheld. The morning came slow and gray. The wind had fallen, leaving the dunes sharp and still. The tide lingered low, a flat sheet of silver stretching toward the horizon. I sat on the porch, staring at the sand and thinking about the letter, about Thomas, about what we hadn't said in years. Marian came out, her hair pulled back, her eyes steady. She carried 2 mugs of coffee. We should talk, she said. I suppose we should, I said. He was already at the table, leafing through papers he had brought, though the papers didn't seem to hold answers, only reminders of old decisions, old missteps. He looked up as we approached, eyes cautious. Shall we begin? He asked. Marian nodded. Yes. He cleared his throat. I didn't expect to stay long. I only wanted to explain, to tell you what was on my mind when I wrote. And I asked. And I suppose I wanted you both to hear it without the interruptions of time, distance, or assumption. We sat in silence for a long moment. The coffee steamed faintly between us. The house creaked gently under the breeze. Outside, the dunes held their own rhythm, indifferent and patient. I never understood why the letter took so long to arrive, Marian said finally. Why now? Thomas looked at her, measured, deliberate. Because some things have to wait for the right moment. Not for the convenience of anyone, but for the sense of readiness. You weren't ready, and I wasn't either. I suppose that makes sense, she said. I didn't speak. I could see the old tension tightening her shoulders, the small furrow between her brows. Years of words left unsaid, of assumptions made, all pressed into the lines of her face. You think this changes anything? I asked. It depends on what you're willing to face, Thomas said. The letter doesn't change what happened. It only lays it out plainly. That's all it can do. Marian's eyes met mine. I saw something I hadn't in weeks. Hesitation, fear, a faint tremor beneath her calm. I suppose we have to decide how much weight to give it, she said. And if we decide it's too heavy? I asked. Then you put it down, Thomas said simply, and live with the memory, as you've done all these years. We sat quietly, listening to the sound of the wind moving across the dunes, the distant slap of waves. The coffee cooled in our mugs, and the house seemed to hold its breath with us. I have to know, she said finally. What exactly did you intend with this letter? To explain, to acknowledge, he said. Not to change the past, but to let you understand my role in it. I can't undo the decisions made, the things left unsaid, but I can give context. And context, at least, can clarify choices, motives, consequences. And does it? I asked. It depends, he said, on how you receive it. The wind picked up faintly, brushing the porch. I looked at the house, at the repaired boards, the freshly painted trim, the quiet that had been ours. And I realized that context or letters or visitors didn't rebuild trust. We did. Slowly, carefully, day by day. Marian set her mug down. We'll read it, she said. All of us. Together. Slowly. Thomas nodded. That's all I ask. The silence stretched. Outside, a gull cried over the dunes. The tide rolled slowly, patient as ever. We sat together, 3 people in a house that had seen storms, past and present, and waited. I realized then that confrontation wasn't always loud. Sometimes it came in measured words, careful tones, the pause between breaths. It arrived with patience, like the tide. And in that quiet, I felt the old tension settle, not gone, but faced. Marian looked at me. I soughed. "We can face it," she said. "Yes," I said. "We can." Thomas exhaled slowly, leaning back. "That's all I wanted. Nothing more, nothing less." The wind whispered against the eaves. The house creaked in response. Outside, the sea moved endlessly. And I understood that whatever the letter contained, whatever truths it revealed, it would not undo the weeks we had spent repairing this place, repairing ourselves. It could only shape what came next. The morning light shifted through the window, catching the edge of the table, the steam rising from the mugs, the faint smile on Marian's face. Outside, the dunes held their rhythm. Inside, the house breathed with us, steady and enduring. And for the first time in years, I felt the weight of the past balanced by the certainty of the present. The morning was pale gold, soft through the windows. The wind had settled, leaving the dunes still and silent. The tide lay low, a thin sheet of silver along the shore. I stepped onto the porch with a mug of coffee in hand, and Marian followed, carrying hers. Thomas was already there, seated at the table, papers from the letter spread before him. He looked up as we approached, calm but expectant. "We'll read it together," Marian said. He nodded. "Yes." Slowly. We did. One paragraph at a time. Words meant to explain, to acknowledge, to offer clarity. Not apologies, not confessions, not demands. Just truths from the past laid bare. I watched Marian as she read. Her hands gripped the paper lightly. Her eyes shifted, absorbing each line, each sentence, with quiet deliberation. I noticed the subtle changes, the way her shoulders relaxed slightly, the faint lift at the corner of her mouth. Thomas spoke little, only clarifying a detail when needed. His presence was steady, a reminder that the past could be faced, not just remembered. When the final sentence was read, we sat in silence. The wind carried the faint scent of seaweed and rain from the dunes. The gulls called somewhere far off, and the tide moved slowly, inevitably, toward the horizon. Marian folded the letter carefully and set it aside. She didn't look at Thomas. She didn't look at me. She only breathed, letting the quiet settle over us. "It's done," I said finally. "Yes," she said. "It is." Thomas stood. "I'll go. I shouldn't overstay." "You don't need to," Marian said. "Thank you for sending it. For coming." He nodded. "I steady. I hope it helps. Not to fix anything. Only to make sure it's understood." He left quietly. The gravel crunched under his car tires, then fell silent. The house seemed to exhale. Marian and I remained on the porch, the light shifting across the sand and sea. "Do you feel lighter?" I asked. She didn't answer immediately. She sipped her coffee, eyes on the tide. "Perhaps," she said, "but not in the way I expected. It's clearer. Nothing hidden. Nothing assumed." "That's enough," I said. She glanced at me. "It is. For now." We sat together, letting the silence stretch, full but comfortable. The house stood firm behind us, solid and repaired. The dunes held their shape, the sea kept its rhythm, and the world felt as it should, steady, enduring, patient. "Shall we finish the shutters today?" I asked. "Let's," she said. We moved inside, gathering paint and brushes. Our hands brushed lightly as we passed the materials back and forth, a simple acknowledgement of presence, of connection. No words were needed. The house was alive again, not just with repairs, but with the quiet rhythm of shared effort. The letter had come, the past had been faced, and still we remained. Outside, the tide shifted, gulls called, and the wind carried a faint promise through the dunes. I realized that what we had built here, this house, this rhythm, this careful trust, was stronger than any letter, any visitor, any storm. We worked together, shoulder to shoulder, letting the sun move across the floorboards, letting the quiet mark its place. And as the day stretched toward evening, I understood that some resolutions are simple, slow, and silent, but they last. The house held us. The dunes held us. And for the first time in a long time, I could say the same about each other. We didn't speak of what might come next. The tide, the wind, and the quiet of the house said it all. And that was enough.